What's up, guys, and welcome back to a brand new episode of the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Jabril, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope everyone's doing well.
And for you guys who have never seen the show before, we're just two guys that like to talk over the biggest stories in gaming, but we always like to start with what we've been playing. So, Steve, what you been playing?
So yeah, two major drops obviously came out this week, and
Yep.
that's pretty much all my time has been split into. So the first one I don't have the most to say about because I haven't played it that much, but Pokemon Legends Arceus is finally released, whether we want it to be existing or not. And but you know, in general, we've all complained for a long time now that we were tired, stale, and just bored of that Pokemon formula. We understand it works, we understand why it does it that way, but we've been wanting a little bit of that evolution, and I think this game takes steps in the right direction. I think a lot of it is sort of like half steps. I don't think a lot of the things have been truly pushed to where they need to be. It's cool seeing the Pokemon out in the wild. It's cool to see being able to battle a little bit more actively, even though there's no point really into these sort of active battles. Not too much reason to be walking around in the middle of the fights. The catching mechanics I think is fun, catching them in the wild, and it's interesting to see a Pokemon story that's not the, you know, go get 8 badges then beat these super trainers. So it is fun. Now I'm very early on. I still think I'm only about 5 to 6 hours in the game, just because I don't know, there's something about it. It's not like grabbing me where I'm like super addicted to it. It's just sort of my passive game on my Switch, but I like a lot of it. You know, there's a lot of these little small throwbacks to your classic, you know, Pokemon formula that is exciting to see again, and it's like sort of getting that itch. I just think people are overlooking the shortcomings of it. People are, you know, giving this 8s and 9s, and though I don't believe in number scores, there's no way it's anywhere up there. I wouldn't say it's terrible, but I do think it's a very slightly above average attempt at revitalizing Pokemon. It makes me excited and nervous for the next true entry, because I think some of these mechanics will probably not come back because it's somewhat more expensive to do it that way. You know, not do this sort of cookie cutter form that we have, but it's interesting. So I still do want to play it. You know, minor gripes is, you know, some of the tech power behind them. I don't know what happened here. Those draw distance are terrible. The frame rates are pretty rough. This game looks like a solid GameCube game, but those graphics are nowhere near what we've seen available on the Switch. And though graphics don't make the game, it definitely needs to accompany it, especially when Pokemon is such a game that emphasizes its art style, and this art style looks pretty terrible. Especially playing, you know, I finally got my Switch OLED, so I did switch to a Switch OLED, and I noticed zero difference when I was playing on the OLED, not compared to when I, you know, booted up Dread or one of the Mario games on my OLED. It looked fantastic. This game looked nothing. It looks like a watery down mess. But in its bones, it's still Pokemon. It still has that charm that kind of gets you. And I'm hoping, and I know a lot of people say that I'm at the point, like an hour or two more, and I'm at the point where the game like gets really good, gets really open when you get all these different things, and you can like ride Pokemon, and it starts to like open up into what it really is, and starting to go for a stride. So I'm not there yet. I'm hoping to get there. I'm hoping I don't get too distracted to get there. The only other thing that I've been playing, pretty big chunk of, I mean, it came out Friday, and I've already, I think, logged in almost 8-10 hours. Dying Light 2, Stay Human, finally released from Techland. I was a huge Dying Light fan. I absolutely adore that game. I recently just replayed it on Xbox. So finally, the, you know, in long development sequel. Was worried about this one for a while because things were just kind of missing. The game would go quiet for almost 2 years at a time, and we had no idea what was going on with it. Luckily, there was an interview with one of the directors, and he came out, kind of calmed a lot of those worries, and, you know, the game's finally out here, and I adore the game. I am completely addicted to it, where like games like Pokemon hasn't grasped me yet. Dying Light, I don't know if it was just the promise that I knew the gameplay was going to be super solid, just grabbed me right away. To have that sort of, you know, that parkour system back, you know, even to jumping with the R1 button, which always feels awkward except in this one game. Being back in a different world, seeing this, you know, this takes about 30 years, 20 something years after the events of the first one, to seeing what kind of occurred due to one of the, you know, the one canonical ending in Dying Light. super exciting. Some of the mechanics are a little interesting. I don't know how I feel exactly about the sort of infected mechanic, where now if you're not in the light for a certain amount of time, that you only have a certain amount of time to get back into UV or go rest up at night. I don't know how I feel about that, because it just contains the exploring aspect of it at night, which was a big part of Dying Light 1, getting certain samples and getting all these different getting all these different experiments and objectives done at night was a part of that gameplay. So I don't know if there's something that happens later on that helps you past that. But I don't like having to just be like, no, you can't explore at night because you don't have your UV lights, or you eat these little blue mushrooms. But the combat is as janky and messy as I remember Dying Light to be, in the best way possible. I don't think this is a game that's supposed to be this super tight, realistic experience. This is not supposed to be The Last of Us. This is not supposed to be this, super moment-to-moment game. It's all really about the chaotic nonsense fun, to me anyway, and I do like that. I do like a lot of the mechanics. I like how some of the parkour stuff is being integrated into the combat now, where you can lunge over the characters and pile drive them, or do that super kick them off the building. Stories and characters are a little weird. There's a lot of cringiness. There's a lot of stuff that you can tell was just filled in to hit that 500-hour marker that they were talking about. So I can see all those kind of things, and I can see slight shortcomings where a lot of the environments are starting to share assets. Not to the point where in Dying Light 1, where like that same character model was used for like every side mission. There was this like one generic guy who was used for every single game NPC, and that got annoying. Not to that point, luckily you're getting different environments. You're getting from what the hub world looks like to or your hub station looks like, to the other outskirts of the area. So really liking it. Again, the story it's there. It's nothing to write home about. It's nothing that to the point where I'm like super excited. I think the main character shares too much familiar themes with Crane from the first one. I think Aiden and Crane are too much alike. There's a small backstory to Aiden in this one that seems to be pushing, to be like his identity, where Crane was really supposed to be like this outsider coming in. Aiden's supposed to be, someone who grew up in this world, and that's how the world's always been for him. So to not see enough difference between the two is almost, I don't know, something's like fractured there for me. I just wish they'd stood out a little bit more after all this time, that the story was just slightly tighter in a better compact way, instead of just worrying about expansiveness. So, but I like a lot of the new zombies. I like the weapon mechanics. I do like the skill tree. I think it takes a little longer to get your level up and your experience in this one. I think that's by design. There were early glitches in Dying Light 1 where if you jumped and pushed some of the zombies into spikes, you were getting ridiculous amount of XP. So I think that's obviously designed purposely to level up slower in this one, because they want you to do more side missions, which is half and half. So if you're someone who wants just a blast through the story, you may have some trouble doing that. But all in all, it's the game I expected it to be. It surpassed some of my expectations, and it's hit just that bare minimum that I expected it to be. I understand that there's sort of ecosystem out there talking about the glitches and the patches, because they did send out a pre-patched version to the reviewers. I've been playing it on PS5, naturally PS5 copy. I have not run into any of this. I haven't had any crashes. Like I said, about 8 hours in. No crashes, no visual glitches. I think I got stuck on a rooftop, between a rooftop and a window one time, which I just had to kind of spam the jump button, and I broke out of that. Besides that, most of those small issues that people were talking about in the early reviews have been patched, and Techland themselves has said that like the first patch was like 1,000 fixes, which thank God for that delay then, because I don't imagine what this game would have looked like if it didn't get delayed and its state it would have been in. But all in all, really excited to get back into it. It's that's Dying Light 1 it's pretty much one of my top 10 games of this last gen, so I hope Dying Light 2 can sort of succeed that in many ways, and it seems like it's doing that, unless the game starts to flatten out or stale for me. I don't see why it wouldn't. So that's all I've been playing, really, those two games, accompanied with a lot of little things, just trying out my Switch OLED, obviously, like I said, but we don't have to get into that. We've talked enough about that. So Jabril, what have you been playing?
Yeah, so I've pretty much been playing the exact same things as you. The only difference, and very interestingly enough, is I'm actually kind of on the opposite side of you. Where, yeah, like I had a better time with Pokemon than I had with Dying Light, but I'll get into that. actually, because I do like Dying Light quite a bit. So yeah, Pokemon I actually beat front to back. So it took me about 15 hours, so nothing too abnormal there in terms of kind of the typical Pokemon length. But overall, I'm very positive about it. But I kind of have to look at it two ways, which is kind of creating that kind of conflict within me. And I'm not the only one who's kind of experiencing this, where it's like, if you compare this to other Pokemon games, I think it's an enormous step up, and it's a very impressive game. But the problem is, all the new things that they implement are not in any way innovative on like a game industry level. So it's a pretty run-of-the-mill, even if someone would say stale open world game, compared to non-Pokemon games. It's only when you kind of compare it within its own franchise where you can see that it's a major step up. And so it's conflicting, like I almost could have two scores for it, because, like when people are like dropping those 8 and 9s, I certainly understand that from, especially when you're comparing it coming off of Sword and Shield and Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, going into this game at that point, I get it. But then at the same time, the world that they created here, as much heart that is in the story, and I'll get into the mechanics later, at the same time, they haven't really done anything with the world that like Xenoblade didn't do on the Wii years ago. Like, and that's the thing, is like, yes, it's an open world game and there's some cool stuff about it, but it's incredibly empty. There's not much out there, and so in many ways, it almost feels like it kind of dates the game, because this empty open world has plagued a lot of games, but I feel like this definitely was reminiscent of like that late PS2, early PS3, where people were really kind of just figuring out open worlds at that point. That's what it felt like a lot to me. It was definitely giving me a lot of like Xenoblade vibes at times, where you got a lot of space, but not much in there to do with it. And so from that perspective, I think that docks it down a couple points. But I think there's also some things that maybe not as many people talk about, which is obviously it's based on kind of like feudal Japan. And so naturally, with that being a period piece, you're going to get a lot more different type of lore in there. And I think I really appreciate the fact that they found a way to integrate culture and religion into this game in a way that I feel like previous entries never even really attempted to do. There's a real soul to this world that I think the previous games didn't really have. You have different regions and they have their own Pokemon, and sure, there's story and lore to that. But here, you have people who have a specific belief system, and that informs the way they kind of navigate the world around them. And there's conflicts between different clans, and again, it's based on feudal Japan, so there's that conflict. And you got the commander, who I guess could serve as kind of like a daimyo type of figure to kind of unite all these things. And so there's kind of like that kind of political nature of it. There are cultural conflicts, and from that perspective, I was actually fairly impressed that they even attempted to do that. I also played it on the OLED. I played it both docked and undocked, just to kind of get a real clean vibe. I actually kind of preferred it undocked, personally. I agree with you for the most part that it doesn't really take as much of advantage of the OLED screen as like a lot of other games that I've seen play. Even if, just firing older games like Mario Kart, I think pop really crazy. Metroid Dread obviously pops really crazy. For Pokemon, I wouldn't say it's like a dreary or a bland game, but I think the only time that I could really notice where I'm like, oh, okay, that looks actually pretty colorful and pretty, is the points where you eat potato mochi and it's in the afternoon and it really oranges up. You know what I'm talking about? Those are the moments where I'm like, okay, that actually looks really nice. And that's another thing. So 15 hours in, I've gotten a good glimpse of what this game can do. And obviously the big debate amongst some people is the graphics of the game. And so I really took a hard look at it. I do pay a lot of attention to art styles and graphics. Cause, again, art styles is kind of my thing. I really, really enjoy that when it comes to video games. I would say there's an enormous amount of variability in terms of just the overall fidelity of the visuals. I think there are points where there are cutscenes where you actually see floating flower petals in the air and moving clothing and hair and interacting with the environment that I'm like, oh, that actually looks really solid for a Switch game. And then there's other points where things get a little bit more busy, and maybe there's even a little bit of slowdown, crazy pixelization, and really jagged lines. It actually brought me back to a lot of when X and Y came out on 3DS. And so that's the kind of tricky thing, is that there's high variability. So when you want to talk about the overall graphics of the game, it's like, well, pre-rendered cutscenes I think look pretty solid. In game is not that bad, but then there's other times where it kind of really falls apart. So it's kind of like your mileage may vary there. But yeah, that's the thing. It's like I'm overall very positive with it. I had a great time with it. And one of the things that I think I was most impressed with was the willingness of Game Freak to obviously not only consider but actually act on completely breaking the convention that they've spent 20 years doing. And I can appreciate that. Because in many ways we've looked for some degree of innovation, and in many ways the format that they set up with red and blue and yellow, they've kind of kept all the way through, and they introduced a lot of things, generation to generation. I think so things kind of climax with Sword and Shield and Mega Evolutions and things getting crazy there. And then in here, I feel like they've fundamentally changed the structure of the game, where obviously Pokemon's broken into two categories. It's about catching Pokemon, and it's about battling with Pokemon. And for the completionists and the shiny collectors and stuff like that, catching Pokemon is in your best interest. But besides building a solid team, that's kind of the extent of what you really need to catch. And then from that point onward, progression is tied to battling, obviously. Where on this game, it actually fundamentally flips that, and you kind of dabbled in this topic when you were talking, where you catch Pokemon and you battle Pokemon, but for the most part, I would say 75% of the game, all your progression is tied completely to catching Pokemon, because your main focus is not badges, there is no gym leaders, it's all structured around building the world's first Pokedex. So it's about indexing Pokemon that you encounter, and your progression is mostly tied to that. I gained way more XP from that than actually just battling. And I didn't find myself battling that crazy until late game. I would say the last 25%, and I won't get into specifics because obviously that's spoilers, the last 25%, I think the battling increases dramatically. And at that point, it could be simultaneously exciting and then also a little frustrating, because I did feel a little underprepared. And that's one problem I've had with Pokemon games previously, which is I feel like if you play it straight through, there's a good chance that you're going to arrive to the ending not equipped with what you need to actually get all the way through. You might get lucky, but a lot of times you don't. And so that's just a scaling issue, where sometimes I feel like Pokemon games difficulty scales really crazy at the end. And again, Pokemon games are not hard, so it's not impossible to surmount. You spend an hour or two grinding, you'll get through it. But that's always been kind of a minor annoyance. And I think this game has the same issue, but obviously not too crazy, because I got through it with relative ease. So yeah, overall, I would say positive about it. I think there's good things about it. I think there's not so great things about it. Overall, I commend it as a great Pokemon game, but I can't commend it much past that, because again, there are games that we've seen do this better 10 years ago, to be honest. And so Game Freak, I think, took an absolute step in the right direction. I think it was very exciting for Pokemon, and I loved the game, but at the same time, I think they're still behind everybody else, and that's an issue. And people would be like, oh, well, you can't compare them to, I don't know, Bethesda or id or and I'm like, you don't even need to do that. There are two people, there's two other teams, who made Zelda and Mario Odyssey that can be direct comparisons that I think did it better on the same console, on games that looked better that came out 3 years ago. And so that's the kind of tricky thing, where it's like, I have to give them their props in what I feel like they succeeded on, but at the same time, I have to put this game in full context, as much as it pains me. And in full context, I don't think this is like an extraordinary game by any stretch of the imagination, but that doesn't mean I didn't like it. And then kind of quickly moving on to Dying Light 2. You liked it a lot. I like it. I don't like it as much as you do. And it's for a couple reasons. So first off, the gameplay, let's get that out of the way. I love it. There's no major complaints there. I've always loved the parkour system of Dying Light. And they brought that over pretty seamlessly. It feels great. I find myself competing with the stamina meter a lot more this time, which I actually think, though can be frustrating at times, also gives it a little bit of realism where it's like you can't just hang endlessly onto something. So I respect it. So I think that's actually pretty cool. And the UV mechanic is frightening in many points, so it definitely keeps you on edge. So I'm like you, I'm conflicted on it. Like, I don't know if I like it or not, but I can respect them putting it in there, because it certainly makes things a lot more dynamic. But yeah, it's completely evaporated a lot of the exploration that I did in the first one, because I'm just so paranoid about the time. Like, when that 7:30 hits, I'm like, oh crap, or 5:30, whatever, 7:30 or 5:30. I'm like, oh crap, gotta get in, and I'm just
that beeping that goes off.
Yeah, it's freaky, man. So it makes it so I don't really want to check things. I don't even go out at night if I can avoid it. Like, and there's a lot of cool things that happen at night, but I was like, there's no way in hell I'm dealing with that, because like the chase initiations, like, holy crap, like those are scary. And so I like it a lot, but yeah, I think the story is goofy as hell. Like, to be honest, like Aiden is just not doing it for me. He's just kind of a nothing protagonist. I'm not into the whole flashbacks with his sister. His sister's voice is weird. I don't care. It's like it's kind of like a toned down Umbrella Corporation thing that I'm just not really vibing with. Some characters are like kind of cool that I like, and then other characters are just, again, as I said, goofy. A lot of the antagonists, specifically the villains, are on the goofier side for me. That are just like, I don't know, it's just not really doing it for me. But overall, I would say I'm positive on the game, but I'm not like in love with it. Like, it's something that I'm probably gonna try to avoid doing more side quests than necessary, just to kind of get through the story and experience that and kind of move on. I'm not one to really get lost. I'm certainly not going to be one of those people doing the 500 hours. But overall, I think they did a solid job, because the problem was they had a very tumultuous development cycle, and they're following up an unexpected juggernaut. Like, nobody expected the Dying Light 1 to be as good as it was. And so they kind of have to come back with that. And everybody thought that this is probably going to... Not everybody, but many people had the concern that this was going to be way more like Dead Island than Dying Light. But thankfully, it seems like they stuck the landing, in my opinion. Yeah, there are some technical issues with the multiplayer functionality. I haven't played any of that. I have bumped into some glitches where, like, zombies come through the ground. I've seen that before. Like, literally phasing through the world map geometry, not crawling out of something. I've seen that before. But nothing game breaking. I've never had any crashes or anything like that. But I'm on the PS5 just like you. I don't know how the last gen versions run, even though they showed the video, which I thought was really awesome, that they came out and actually overtly showed how last gen games run. That's really awesome. So yeah, like that was as opposed to like friggin' Cyberpunk that like worked so hard to suppress that information. I can respect their forthcoming nature about all the things, where they even dropped their own embargo date. That I thought that was really cool. Where they're just like, okay, this is when everything's going up, because people were asking them like, when can I see footage and reviews from people who are not like Dying Light affiliates? And they gave a straight up date on Twitter, which I was like, that's admirable, because for some reason there's this weird thing about embargoes in the game industry where they like protect it like it's some crazy nuclear code like secret. But they went ahead and talked about it, so I give them a lot of credit there. I think the game is really solid. Again, I won't give it a number score either, but I would very comfortably give this like a 7 if I had to, where it's like, I think it's quite good. It's not like blowing me away, but that could change, because again, I'm only maybe 6 to 7 hours in, something like that. I'm not super deep in, and the game can open up and change dramatically, because from the first hour and a half it's changed dramatically to where I am now, so I could totally see it changing more going forward. So I'm not going to fully judge it yet. And yeah, those are the only two things that I've been playing for the most part.
That sounds good, and you know, that's very true. We're getting to the point that how do you say this? Dying Light is doing a lot of stuff, but it hasn't just like snapped out of that mold yet of the open world like aspect. In many ways, we're about to play some pretty big open world games, so I'm glad this game came out now. I understand we have Horizon coming right up, and then we have Elden Ring, which are going to be open world in their own way. And I think those games are going to take chances and do things a little bit more different than others. So I am glad Dying Light is out when it is. Most reviews are where like everyone's critiques of the game have been. Again, I'm a little more fond of it just because I am fond of Dying Light. I don't know, maybe I might be just a Techland fan. I don't know, but so it's interesting, and it's got its highs, got its lows. But in a world where I thought this game was going to come out, or actually I thought the game was going to be canceled, I lost a bet on that. Actually, I'm glad it exists, and I'm glad it's at least really enjoyable. I do think this is going to suffer from the Hitman formula, where people are going to forget that this came out. Literally at the beginning of February of 2022.
Yeah, it's going to get buried.
It's going to get buried completely. I mean, again, besides the other 2 games in this month, we still have possibly God of War dropping at some point, Gran Turismo, everything that Xbox is holding on to. So we'll have to see where it lands. Where does Dying Light land in the mix of things?
They have one good thing going for them, I'd say, though, is Dying Light 1 came and surprised a lot of people, but then kind of faded for a little bit because, again, it was so early in the year. And they came back with the following, a really impressive DLC, and immediately brought it back on the charts, and that's still selling to this day.
Yes.
So they know how to do DLC there. So if there's one thing going for Dying Light 2, is that they'll know how to bring it back when it needs to be brought back. And I wouldn't be surprised if by like October, September, they come back with something significant, and that brings it back in the conversation, brings it back into people's mind, where this might be able to compete for some people.
That's very true. They did come out and announce that they're going to support this game for about 5 years, which I believe them. Which I believe them because they kept dropping. When I finally went back to replay the first Dying Light, the amount of content that was in there waiting for me
ridiculous,
was overwhelming. And so the fact that Dying Light 2 will have that same sort of support, basically through this generation, which cutting this generation short, I don't know what it will be in 5 years from now. But you have to assume that's PS6 talk, PlayStation 6 talk and stuff. So the fact that Dying Light 2, in a sense, could be, at least in its community, it will constantly be being brought up thanks to all the DLCs and the different updates they'll do to it. So it's exciting. It is exciting, and it's like I'm glad it's back finally, and I'm glad it's unfortunate whether I want it to or not. It will be around for 5 years.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, super exciting. So. Getting into some interesting stories. I know there's. I'm excited to hear your thoughts on that second one, even though it's a mixed bag. But let's get into one that I didn't see coming. So, Sony Interactive Entertainment acquires Bungie, and more acquisitions are on the way. Sony Interactive Entertainment has announced it will acquire Destiny developer Bungie for $3.6 billion, their biggest acquisition. GameIndustry.biz reports that following the deal, Bungie will be run as an independent subsidiary of SIE and will remain a multi-platform studio with the option to self-publish and reach players where they choose to play. Bungie is best known as the creators of Halo, but since becoming independent studio, have focused their efforts on Destiny, a live service first-person shooter RPG, where players can explore the galaxy as Guardians of the Light. The company is also working on a new IP, and they are about to launch a new expansion. Quote, "We've had a strong partnership with Bungie since the inception of the Destiny franchise, and I couldn't be more thrilled to officially welcome the studio to the PlayStation family," unquote, says SIE President CEO Jim Ryan. PlayStation boss Jim Ryan also says we should expect more studio acquisitions in the future in the wake of today's news that Sony is buying developer Bungie for $3.6 billion. GameIndustry.biz Christopher Dring tweeted that Ryan said we should expect more when it comes to the further of PlayStation acquisitions. In the full GameIndustry.biz interview with Ryan and Bungie CEO Pete Parsons, which was published after Drink's tweet, Ryan said that Sony has many more moves to make. He also talked about Sony's ambition to grow its live service and grow beyond PlayStation's historic console heartland. So it's wild to think that in the span of 1 month we have these just constant acquisitions coming from both sides. This is one that makes a lot of sense. I think it makes a lot of sense in many ways. Like they said, Sony has always had some exclusive Destiny deals since Destiny launched on PS3 and PS4, and since then, there's always been sort of a more fondness to PlayStation. Obviously, they had not a public outfall with Microsoft, but the relationship was a little weird for a while. Now, a lot of people have been a little bit, this is the answer to Activision. This is not the answer to Activision, guys. These things take months and months of discussions and plannings, and there was even rumors that Microsoft was, in the talks to Bungie again for some sort of deal, and obviously that all it could have been true, but it all really ends up who ends up paying. So welcoming Bungie into the family of PlayStation, I think this makes a lot of sense. I think Destiny fans have nothing to be worried about. You're going to be able to play your Destiny where you want. The fact that the second thing that both people have been saying, Jim Ryan and from Bungie, is they're staying multi-platform and will be multi-platform future coming, which makes sense. Destiny being a free-to-play venture now Sony gets a lot of that cut. That's a huge community on PC and Xbox that Sony was not gonna just abandon, because what a terrible PR that would be. I think this is a nice bargaining chip. I'm more excited to see Bungie's gonna be Bungie, in my opinion. I'm a huge Destiny fan. I do want them to start doing things that are not Destiny related. I want to see also some, not all the features, some of the DNA that Bungie knows from first-person shooters to start bleeding into the Sony family. I'm more excited to see that. I'm excited to see their code development and partnerships with some first-person shooters. Sony is overflowing with first-person shooter IPs that have not been touched in God knows how long. A lot of them have never been given their fair shake, and I think Bungie's DNA and some of those guys at Bungie will hopefully be able to help over there. As more acquisitions on the way, I don't really have a guess who. It's a wild game now. You never know anymore. Ever since Microsoft the Bethesda one, I was able to get over with. The Microsoft buying Activision is still something I'm trying to get over. So I never know who's next. You gotta think a Sega or Capcom is next on the docket, unless you're starting to go back to smaller acquisitions. But once that people see that Sony can start ponying up $3.6 billion, that acquisition of Insomniac, it looks baby small now.
Yeah.
Which I think, no hate to Bungie, but everything Insomniac has done has been better than what Bungie's has done. And I just coming from an OG Halo fan, you know me, I love it. But go look at the games Insomniac has made, and then look at what Bungie has made. Sony got away with that one, let me tell you. But what did you think of this kind of out of nowhere news?
Yeah, so, and like many acquisition news, I'm kind of conflicted about it because, first off, from a business perspective, it makes 100% sense. This is a great get for Sony because it immediately fills the gap. One of the big things that Sony's kind of struggled with is that first person, especially the FPS live service type games. And so who better than Bungie right now to bring into the family to be able to do that? They've expressed, I've heard this I think from PlayStation for years now, where they've talked about wanting to get into first person shooters, wanting to launch more live service games. And so they've gone to one of the best people doing it right now. So it makes absolute business sense. And sure, I could have concerns about kind of just more horizontal mergers and why that's concerning. And I think I explained that well into depth during the Microsoft acquisition episode. So if you want to hear about that, go back to that episode. And that's kind of just my general concerns about horizontal mergers in general and why that could be a little bit dangerous for the industry at large. And I'm not one of those guys that are on Twitter talking about they're doing a monopoly. It's not that. It's just when you look at a handful of companies controlling everything, that can be concerning in the long term. But overall, I think this is amazing for Sony. I think this is probably very exciting for Bungie because now, budgets are of no number anymore, and now they can fully get all the resources that they'd ever need to do anything on any scale. So Bungie is no longer inhibited by some of the issues that a independent game developer would bump into, where you might want to do something, but sometimes your dream is bigger than your budget. And I don't think they have to worry about that anymore. And so from that perspective, I think it's a really positive thing and probably a really exciting thing for Bungie fans. But at the same time, personally, I like independent teams that maybe work with major developers on a game-by-game basis. And I'm thinking like a Sunset Overdrive with Microsoft and Insomniac type of deal. Because it allows, in some cases, not all, the independent game developer to retain some degree of ownership over their IP. And that is what I think is important, is ownership. Because then you bump into issues down the line where maybe these relationships fall apart, and then people are like, oh, Bungie, you should make so-and-so. And it's like, we can't, because, we were owned by them. But at the same time, that can happen when independent relationships do, because Insomniac doesn't own Sunset Overdrive. So it can happen both ways. But yeah, I was at the same time I was like, I'm conflicted, because at the same time what I loved about Bungie was their detachment from any major publisher, and the fact that they had this absolute juggernaut of a game that they owned, that they can do whatever they want with, and so they weren't bogged down by a lot of the more toxic issues that you see from a lot of these major developers when they kind of detach from Activision. You didn't have to worry about seeing kind of like microtransactions and stuff like that kind of forced into, and not to get back onto that conversation because that's been talked to death by the industry at large. But I would just say that, to a certain extent, I was like a little bummed, because I was like, man, I liked Bungie being this independent force and what that could have meant for their future. But at the same time, if they're stressing that they really do have control and that PlayStation is just roping them in, and I don't know PlayStation to be this kind of hyper controlling environment. I know that they suddenly close teams, but I don't. They're obviously not closing Bungie anytime soon. And from so long as this is a more of a partnership than outright owning, then I think there's a lot of opportunity here, and I think PlayStation already has one of the most ridiculous IP rosters and kind of like slate of teams that we've seen in gaming history. And so for them to kind of just add Bungie to the fold just further cements that. And just when you look at the immense talent, when you go from like the Naughty Dogs to the Gorillas to now like a Bungie, I mean, this is just an incredible stable that Sony has built that is actually really exciting going forward. And I'm curious to see what Sony uses them for, because obviously the most kind of boring answer is like, God, I hope they don't give them Killzone now that Gorilla stepped aside from that, because I want something new from Bungie. I don't want Destiny 3. And obviously, Halo's moved far on, so this is their chance to finally do something new and to do something big, like big again. And I'm really excited about that. So yeah, I'm conflicted on it. I'm mostly positive about it, but obviously there's like something in the back of my head where I'm just like, oh man. But at the same time, yeah, I'm rooting for him.
Yeah, it's a mixed bag. And my one thing, and it's something I've been asking for since they stopped making Halos, I don't want them to do a sci-fi game. I don't want them to do space and aliens, and it's like I want to see them do something else, because I could be wrong, and maybe that's what they want to do. That's what their passion is to do, is to make space stuff and sci-fi stuff, which is why I also would not want them to give them. Don't give them Killzone, because that's also just like Killzone was created as sort of the Halo killer, and to give the OG Halo guys the Sony failed Halo killer, I like Killzone in its own right. I think Killzone needs to come back in a sense, but I do also think we're in a world where SOCOM and Siphon Filter and Resistance, I think that stuff needs to come back first before we jump back into Killzone, especially just thematically wise. But we'll have to see. I think Bungie's very, very occupied now with really relaunching. Not relaunching, they've been relaunched, but focusing on this big Destiny expansion, 30th anniversary of Bungie, I think it was this year that they're doing, and so I think it'll be a long time before we see anything again, unless we start getting some co-developments and some of them coaching some other companies in Sony, but we'll have to wait and see. But this is one that, I was mixed. I didn't understand it. What was the point? But it in the long run and in my possibility vision, it makes a lot of sense, and I'm excited for it.
Yeah, and with them being part of like the Sony family, one thing they might have to get used to now is juggling. So it's like, okay, we know you're working on Destiny now, but like we're going to be working on multiple things at the same time, because we've definitely seen that happening from a lot of Sony teams where they work on multiple things at the same time, and that's not just a Sony thing, obviously. But yeah, you threw out Resistance there. Now we're talking like that. Those are the kind of, if they want to go back to something old, if they have to go back, Resistance. Now we're talking. But
yeah.
All right, so I guess we can move on to the second story. There's a big one, and I guess naturally it makes sense for me to kind of tackle this. And this is by Joe Screbbles over there at IGN. So after years of rumors and reports, Rockstar has finally confirmed that it is working on a new Grand Theft Auto game and that it is well underway. In a new press release, a Rockstar spokesperson wrote, "With the unprecedented longevity of GTA 5, That's one way to phrase it. We know many of you have been asking us about a new entry in the Grand Theft Auto series. With every new project we embark on, our goal is to always significantly move beyond what we had previously delivered, and we are pleased to confirm that we are in active development for the next entry in the Grand Theft Auto series is well underway. We look forward to sharing more as soon as we are ready, but please stay tuned to the Rockstar Newswire for official details. On behalf of our entire team, we thank you for your support and cannot wait to step into the future with you. So, you got a story here, and then at the same time, it's like not much to go off of. So for the very first time, we do have formal confirmation from Rockstar that a new GTA was underway. Obviously, this was known to the industry at large that this was happening. We had plenty of rumors about it and just kind of common sense. They were making something. But now finally Rockstar's out and coming and saying that it's coming. But timeline-wise, it's almost impossible to predict because you can't use past the development cycles as a basis because the GTA cycle is so thrown off now with the fact that we're coming up on the 10-year anniversary of them putting out GTA and still supporting it. Like, it's insane. Like, GTA Online has almost outlasted Red Dead Online, despite Red Dead having come out like way after, fairly recent, like 2018 or something like that, and it's still kind of outlasted it. Like, this is this insane juggernaut of a game, and so this was kind of like of course. But it is, I guess, exciting to see them finally acknowledge it. Like, so we know without any doubt, if there's some kind of person out there doubting that, okay, well, Rockstar hasn't said anything. Well, now that's closed. But yeah, this is likely years off. But it has been in development for quite some time. Even if you want to say, like, okay, well, they finished... And Rockstar has many subdivisions, so we know that they were working on this while Red Dead was still in development. But even if you just want to say, well, they really ramped it up after Red Dead. Red Dead's been out for, 2-3 years now? So it's been incubating for quite some time, so this is a really exciting thing. But yeah, well, we don't have any information about the scale of this game, which you can assume is going to probably increase because they're very much a let's one up our last thing. They're not really a scaled down type of studio, so I'm expecting this game to be kind of comically large, and not just in terms of like map size, but in terms of just like their attempt to do kind of crazy things with the narrative and just content in general. And say what you want about GTA 5, but it is not content light, or at least not now. Once upon a time, maybe you could argue that, especially with GTA Online, but no longer is it like that with all these DLCs and various missions that they've added to it over time, in addition to the core story, which I think has quite a robust amount of content in and of itself. But yeah, we don't know anything about the location of this game. Where is it taking place? Obviously, we had kind of BS rumors floating around for a while that it's a return to Vice City and stuff like that, but that's kind of just like, BS Facebook nonsense conjecture. It's not really anything confirmed or anything like that. So who knows where this honestly could take place. There people were alleging that there's possibly a teaser, and I think what it was, San Andreas or something like that, the definitive edition in the billboard or something like that. But there's not much we can go on in terms of that. So what are your thoughts about this story?
Yeah, I was so... Don't get me wrong, I'm super excited for Grand Theft Auto 6 to finally... Like, when I actually see that trailer, I think I won't even believe it. Because for the last decade, it's just been GTA 5. They're re-releasing GTA 5 again next month, I believe. I think it's sometime in March.
Yeah, March 15th, I think.
March 15th now. We're getting GTA 5 again for current gen, PS5 and its series.
GTA 5 3.
Yeah, so it's a little shocking. I don't understand I don't see where the story was. I was like, we knew Grand Theft Auto 6 wasn't in development. I don't know who was out there thinking that they weren't going to make a GTA 6. Now, what form does GTA 6 come in? That's a different story. Are they going to just do GTA Online 2? You gotta remember, they never say GTA 6. They just say the next Grand Theft Auto game. That stuff is true. I think I don't want to make a bet, but I don't believe it will be called Grand Theft Auto 6. I want it to be called Grand Theft Auto 6. I'm okay with them launching Grand Theft Auto 6 and then having the online component called GTA Online 2. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that 100%. I don't think so. I think it's going to be called something else, or I'm not sure. I do wish we knew a little bit more timeline where they were with this game. Like you're saying, they're a big studio, a lot of money. They know what they're doing. GTA 5 and GTA Online has been printing money for them without them having to do much for years now. Red Dead Redemption 2 came out. It was a big story success. The online wasn't what people wanted to, so they learned from there. Obviously, GTA 6 has been in the planning sense and small development. There's assets and all that stuff that starts early on. I just wish, not that I want a date for the game. I don't think it'll be 20. I think it'll probably be early as 2025.
Yeah.
I just wish we knew a little bit where they were. I would rather them not have said anything. Come out and announce it, tease it, throughout 2024, and then maybe release 2025. It's almost just to be like, yeah, we're working on something. We know you're working on something. I think it would have been smarter for them to just come out and be like, we're not working on Bully, because that was a big story going around for a while. We're not working on a Bully remake, and just be like, listen, we're all in on something else. So it's interesting. I'm excited. It's hard for me to get amped up when I don't know what we're getting. In a world that we get a game that's 90% more connected to the online aspect, which is something that I never got super into. I play GTA Online occasionally. Like once a year I'll download it. I know you were, for years now, way more religiously playing it.
I was playing it yesterday, so
yeah, it's always been your other game that you've been playing, and it's never been for me, the online portion, just because I just never really spoke to me. I've always been more of the character heavy story characters and the nonsense that goes on in the story. So until I know that's what we're getting, it's hard for me to get super amped up for this. I guess there's something to say, to be like, at least they just got it out the way and they're like, yes guys, we're making another GTA, not GTA 6, another GTA is coming. Especially after the sort of debacle and the slight stink that GTA the trilogy has had. So it's exciting to see, but until there's more story to it, it's hard for me to be like amped up and let's go, guys. Let's take it easy. It's gonna be at least 2025, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. And also, before moving on, I did want to address one thing. A lot of people have had the kind of conjecture or belief or theory that it would be likely that GTA 5 would be the last one with any kind of single-player story DLC or single-player story present, period. And that the subsequent one would just be a major revamp of GTA Online. So GTA 6 would be the online game. A kind of core single-player experience. And I couldn't disagree with that more. And evidence of that, I mean, you have a lot of evidence. So you could point yourself to other single-player games like Red Dead. So obviously they still believe in that format, first off, that form of storytelling. And then even if you just want to keep it to the GTA, on March 15th, the major revamp to GTA is happening to the story mode. Yes, online is getting beefed up too, but the story mode is what's getting the 60 frames per second, 4K, all this stuff.
Absolutely.
And so if they really were like just about like, okay, we're only putting effort into what makes us money, which is the logic behind why they wouldn't go with a single player story going forward, then I don't think they would dedicate any resources to revamping GTA 5, the narrative, coming out in a month from now. And this is in 2022. This is almost 10 years after this game released, and they're putting a new coat of polish on it. So to me, this shows that they are very interested in single player content and keeping that alive and keeping that present in conjunction with a very robust online system. So I very, very much disagree with all the people making assertions that like their GTA 6 won't have a single player story. It's like, I think that's very unlikely. Single player DLC, on the other hand, I think very well might be dead, because again, that's a lot of extra resources, and they probably just see crazy more returns if they offer it to GTA Online instead, which is unfortunate because I just recently played GTA 4, and Battle of Gay Tony and Lost in the Damned are incredible, and I love those games. And it's just a shame that GTA 5 didn't get that same treatment of something set in that map with a very different tone. And that's the benefits of these story DLCs, is that you can get the same game, same mechanics, maybe similar weapons and cars and stuff like that, but an entirely different tone. The Ballad of Gay Tony is this kind of chaotic action movie, kind of flamboyant party scene type of vibe. Lost and Damned is this dark, gritty biker thing, and then GTA 4 is this immigrant story, and everything's very different. GTA 5 just kind of is GTA 5, and in many ways them having 3 different protagonists allows for that different tone difference, and so I think they'll find ways to work that in a feature that are probably not the traditional kind of story DLC drops that they did once upon a time, but I think it's very likely that it's going to have a single-player component. So anybody who's listening who was concerned that it was only going to be a GTA Online, I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest the opposite.
Yeah, that's true, and that's something that it's a good point that they've luckily never abandoned. They could have easily just been porting and updating online, but that's not even what they show in the trailers for the new game. Well, not the new game, the new port. They don't really even discuss it. They show you Trevor Michael and everyone in the gang in these iconic scenes already. So that's what they do focus on. So that's a really good point as well. All right. So getting to the final story a little. So I can't believe we're actually discussing this. I thought this has been gone for good, but Google Stadia reprioritizing and rebranding. So 1 year after Google revealed it now saw Google Stadia cloud gaming idea as a mere technology platform for industry partners rather than a true rival to Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft, Business Insider is reporting that some Stadia gamers' fear have come true. The entire Stadia project has been demoted within Google, and its new priority is to power experience from companies including Peloton, Bungie, and Capcom, rather than attracting more games to Stadia itself. 2 sources told Business Insider that Google Stadia boss Phil Harrison now reports to Jason Rosenthal, Google's vice president of subscription services, instead of directly to Google hardware boss Rick Osterloh? Sure. That's a demotion for the entire Stadia division, though that's perhaps not too much of a surprise. Stadia wasn't meeting Google's internal expectations, drastically missing sales targets despite paying tens of millions of dollars per game just to secure ports for the platform, according to the reports last year. The Stadia Twitter account tweeted the following, quote, "If you hear one thing, hear this. The Stadia team is working really hard on a great future for Stadia and cloud gaming. We hope you agree, and we know the proof is in the playing." Unquote. The tweet goes on from there about games for pro members and that more is on the way. So we're getting to the point where the nails, there's only so many more nails that need to go into this coffin before it's said and done, and Stadia being basically rebranded and deprioritized now as the rumor is going as just Google streaming or whatever. This is something we've seen come and go. We've seen Google just slowly prioritize something until they just kill it. You guys remember there was a Google social media, whatever that was called, the Circle, whatever that was. We've had multiple Google tablets that have existed and died. There's that whole website that exists to Google's failed projects now. I know we kind of not been big haters of Google, but we've been big skeptical guys on it, especially as everyday gamers. We saw where Google what Google wanted to do. We knew from the beginning that Google was not going to be able to hit that because what they were promising was basically almost impossible in a sense. So for them to finally just start, this is the final part before you start just sunsetting projects. This is the same stuff like Sony was doing with Vita. Start prioritizing just porting the stuff off of Vita, and then eventually just dies out. Part of me is kind of sad to see it go. I see the promise of streaming, but when you have this whole prioritizing, remember all the commercials on YouTube of this, and that wasn't even that long ago if you think about it, that Google Stadia commercials were everywhere with that guy floating in a room. I think it would have been smarter to end up, and I understand there's contracts involved. I think it would have been smart to just finally curtain call this. You gotta let because you've charged people the way you charge people, you have to let this service exist until the numbers are very minute, and then you can kill it off. But having this sort of fake promise, and Business Insider usually doesn't report on some of this stuff until they have some good sources. We know it's on its way out, and it's unfortunate. Google didn't listen to its biggest not only did not listen to its competitors, but its supporters and its criticism. Google really had their head down for some reason. None of this took me by surprise, but what did you think when you saw Google Stadia trending again for a hot minute?
Yeah, unfortunately, it was like one of those things that was kind of like the inevitable reality.
Yeah.
Kind of just seeing this, like, we all knew this was kind of coming. And yeah, again, technically, this is rumors, so that Google hasn't confirmed anything. But the reality was, when they announced this, you and I were kind of on the thing where it's like, we know how Google is. Again, you mentioned the site of all their chronicalizing and indexing all their failed programs. That this was likely not gonna succeed long term, and this is gonna go as far as Google finances it, basically. And so when Google inevitably bails on it, that'll be the end of Stadia, and that it won't come a moment sooner or after, because they have so much money that they can float programs. They've done it before, where nobody adopts something and they kind of just float it for a little bit because it's their program, and then when they decide to sunset it, it's gone. But pretty much, I think the end of Stadia, for me personally, where I'm like, okay, it's done, is when they closed down that internal development studio, because to me that showed that they were going to be solely reliant on those external relationships, and those external relationships were virtually non-existent. They were just hemorrhaging money to be able to bring these games onto their platform. People were not fiending to jump onto their platform. People arrived later onto the scene and had more name recognition, if not just as much name recognition, like the Luna, them coming up onto the field. You still have xCloud doing their thing, and it's just the idea that Stadia has Google behind them and beat Amazon to the punch with that to the industry, and in many ways were not able to retain that market share was concerning. And then they closed down their internal studio after, I don't know if you remember, bringing Jade Raymond. It was a whole big thing that they had done. They brought this team, and it just didn't amount to anything, and then they closed it down. And when they closed it down, that means, okay, so Google doesn't really believe in this, so it's just a matter of time. And then just kind of hearing this, where they're pretty much done with it, then yeah, it's an inevitability. But for right now, they haven't acknowledged it, so obviously they're gonna try, and at least in the temporary, to save face, because they don't want what little player base they have to jump ship immediately and start asking for refunds and canceling their subscriptions. That would happen immediately, if for whatever reason. So they're gonna be like, nope, we're still working. And who knows? If one thing, the Stadia, at least on the social media side, are very dedicated to what they do, and they very much believe in this. And I know there's lots of people on that team, the Stadia development team, who probably really love and want to continue developing for their project. So from their perspective, yeah, they're going to keep their head down to the computers and continue working and trying to offer as much as they can for their small player base. But at the same time, you could see the writings on the wall, where it's like Google, as just a massive corporation overall, is just not fully invested in this, because I feel like if they were, they would make more of a concerted effort to put this everywhere. Every time I go onto Amazon.com, there is some kind of Luna something there, and the banner, maybe a little suggestion, and yeah, you could say that's catered to my algorithm a little bit because I play games a lot, of course. But yeah, you see the little controller there, you see something, but like Google, I don't see Stadia anything except for the occasional trend on Twitter because people are goofing on it. Like, that's about it. And every once in a while, yeah, like at one of these game shows, you'll see the little Stadia logo, and they'll do a little sunset. But yeah, that's it. And that's like, if I barely see it, imagine your kind of run-of-the-mill consumer, who I felt like this was initially targeted to, was people without consoles who would like to game, who don't want to pay for a whole bunch of hardware. And so how is the average consumer ever going to bump into this if they don't make a more concerted effort? And who knows, maybe they have a very solid presence on the TV side. I don't have regular cable, so I can't speak to that. But yeah, no, it is kind of a shame, because like, though we've made no qualms about making that. So like, I never believed in Stadia. Let me make that very clear if anybody had any doubt. I never thought it was going to work. I didn't want it to fail ever. I don't root for anybody's downfall. But I just didn't think it was going to work. But hey, if you look in the view of the camera, I still have my Stadia right there. So like, I got it. I own it. I bought it. I gave it a shot. But it's just not really my thing. And even though I'm not someone that is interested in streaming games, I wouldn't even say that I don't believe in cloud gaming, because obviously, like, I very much think it's going to be a massive thing. I just never thought that Stadia would be the ones to do it. Because, and literally has less to do with Stadia and more to do with Google and their just unwillingness to commit to anything and make it work. You know what I mean? Like, a lot of times when it comes to like newer technologies, you have to take the L for a while before like things really cement to where they need to be. And part of me really thinks of like Amazon, for example, who were hemorrhaging money in the 90s like crazy before they ever turned a profit. It took forever. And that was because it's just a new industry and they had the money to float it and they made it work. Where the Google, on the other hand, they'll like throw something out there, and if it just doesn't take, they're like, screw it, and they move on. Like, what happened to Google Glass? Like, you remember that? That was supposed to be the future of like augmented reality, and you hear everybody but Google talking about that these days. And so yeah, that was my main thing. So it's a shame, but at the same time, unfortunately for them, the streaming ecosystem I don't think is losing anything by them going away, unfortunately. As sad as that is, because you have the united front of Sony and Microsoft with xCloud trying to keep other parties, specifically Google and Amazon, out. You got Amazon with Luna that I feel like kind of usurped Stadia. And then at the same time, you got Stadia fading away. And I would not be surprised if you see another entity jumping into the space as well. I mean, obviously, you got Netflix with their kind of little streaming thing that they're playing around with as well. So, yeah, it's like Stadia gone but not forgotten. We'll miss you. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know what y'all expected.
Yeah. It's like one of those things, like, that's how long it took. You know, it's like we knew it was going to go. We always had an idea. You know, if unfortunately Google Stadia had to die off and make the mistakes that luckily xCloud was able to learn off of. Not that I use xCloud that often. There's times where I'm using it way more than I should, than I think I should, but because it just works better, works with my same membership. It works. It's all one thing. You know, I didn't need to resubscribe. I didn't need to do the $10 a month or whatever their pro membership was, or rebuy a game that I have downloaded on 4 other devices. I just don't understand. You know, I knew there were a very few Google Stadia like evangelists. I don't know how they thought they were gonna really get away with this, because it just made no sense in many ways. But it's like, I hope these companies that have these, you know, Bungie was tied in with them for some money. I know Capcom was as well. But the writing's been on the wall. So if you think all the Stadia exclusive games, even though they're not, it's like Serious Sam 4 and stuff, all those games have been starting to appear, funny enough, on Game Pass, and other, you know, companies as well. It's been showing up on Steam, and they show up on, some of you have been showing up on Switch. So it just shows you that these guys are really hoping that their games get a second chance when they're not tied down to the exclusivity of streaming through Google Stadia.
Yeah, and who knows? This will very likely not be the end of what we see of this technology, because that's the one thing. Stadia had a very shaky launch, but the streaming technology in and of itself, as someone who's personally used it, is not bad at all. And in many times, you know, when I was playing Destiny on there, it was almost better than some other streaming platforms that I've tried out in the past. At times, again, there's high variability. I have pretty good internet. So I'm able to get kind of like a good litmus test between all of them. And I think there's some solid tech there that they can possibly leverage and, you know, maybe license out and work with other companies on. So even if we do see the collapse of Stadia, this technology likely will reemerge somewhere else to aid someone else. You know what I mean? So,
yeah, absolutely.
And that would not surprise me at all. You know, Google has done kind of the open source thing before in the past. Where they're like, okay, we have this tech, you guys use it and make the best. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see something similar like that. And if that's years from now, okay, but I wouldn't be surprised if I seriously doubt that they'll let Stadia collapse and just die with their technology. Like, they're like, okay, nobody touched this. Like, if they really do believe in streaming and in cloud gaming, and there's lots of different parties that are interested, I could see them partnering with somebody to help them in that process. Now, I doubt Microsoft and Sony need their help, but you know, there are the Netflixes of the world who maybe would want to partner with them, and maybe and maybe leverage some of Google's small stable of relationships to boost Netflix is. And again, Netflix doesn't seem like interest to go into the full streaming world, but who knows what the future holds. So I don't think it's the last of what we see of this service overall. It just might not be going under the name Stadia anymore.
Yeah, I think that's also a smart thing. I think the Stadia brand is tainted.
It's toxic at this point.
Yeah.
All right, guys. So that was the three stories that we had for you guys this week. Hope you guys liked the show, and we'll see you guys not next week, but the week after. So this was the NeoVintage podcast. I'm Jabril, and I'm here with
Steve. Hope you guys enjoyed.
And we'll see you guys then. Bye.